blood go wild. Yeah, getting fucked up. Getting white boy wasted. I'm about to throw up. All right. Jesus Christ.
Y'all gotta fuck my taste, bitch. Hold up. Y'all can't talk about basic. Hold up. We might have more Power Rangers. Hold up. My niggas also dangerous. Hold up. Y'all niggas talk outrageous. Hold up. Don't get caught in the matrix. Hold up. Got that touch my savior. Hold up. Give me that touch with my head. Punk ass lyrics can't hear it no more. Stand up to the man, can't fear him no more. Son of damn, don't feel it no more. You been dropping a minute, but can't steer it no more. Riding the wave, but now you're chilling on shore. What's it used to being rich when your inside's poor? But you don't wanna see more. You wanna see more, but you wanna see soul. Life that slows you down, your body is acting up. Your mind is out of bounds, it's telling you pack it up. You check about thoughts and memories that's adding up. Like threesomes overseas, bitches without a buzz. You feel alive like you can't have enough. You probably feel paralyzed if you ain't had a buzz. You still feel paralyzed if ups and trackless. Friends just having kids and shit ain't adding up. Still used to having a world with no love. What's the use of having a light with no love? What's the use of ingredients with no sauce? What's the use of the physical with no source? We clear up. Y'all gotta fuck my taste, bitch. Y'all can't talk about basic. We might have more Power Rangers. My niggas also dangerous. Y'all niggas talk outrageous. Don't get caught in the matrix. Got that touch my savior. Give me that touch with my haters.
All right, one more. We're gonna play my favorite Snow Strippers song. Maybe. And then I think we're going to talk about Trent.
Can see your face behind the smoke. Sometimes I wonder if you like it when I'm dying for it. So what if I'm free? I only have myself and I don't really care when you put it in me.
I love that synth. I really like the synth. Oh boy. There's new terrible things happening. Great. Don't have to elaborate on that, but great. I'll tell you what, we'll start with this one. I don't think I ever finished it. It's not very meaningful because we're making two different arguments. But
sacrifice.
I will watch it. So just to be clear, my contention with the faith of Christianity is that I don't believe God is real. I have no problem with Jesus being a real historical person. Some people think he wasn't. I have no reason to believe that. Like, it's possible that they made him up, but I don't think they did. I think there probably was a guy who was a Messiah figure and was very popular among some people of the time. Like, that existed previously and it existed after him. So that's not a thing that changes my perspective at all. Jesus being historical makes it more likely that the Bible is talking about a real person. But for me, that doesn't make it more likely that he was God, any more than proving that Paul was a historical person would prove anything beyond that, right? Like, that's my stance. I don't believe that proving that Jesus had a birth certificate, I don't think that proves he is actually divine, which is the only thing that matters, right? It doesn't matter if he was real or not. It matters if he was God or not. So, this argument seems to be, at least so far, showing evidence that Jesus was a historical person. And I am more than happy to concede that point.
Orthesterion, as it was later named because of its identification with the altar of the temple, but trapezum, dining table, For here did the faithful celebrate the first rite, except for baptism, of the new religion, the breaking of bread and drinking of wine, as Jesus had instructed the apostles. So this early inscription shows that Jesus is God because you only offer sacrificial worship on an altar to God.
I mean, boy, I always belabor the point here, but Trent is saying this proves that Jesus was God because you only offer sacrifices to God. But I would say, Trent, there are an awful lot of religions where people have offered sacrifices, but you don't believe those gods are real. So you can say those people aren't offering sacrifices to God, they're offering sacrifices to an idol or to a man. And I would say, but they think they're offering them to God. As far as they're concerned, that God is real. The God they're offering sacrifices to is real. How is that any different than people offering sacrifices to the God that I grew up believing in because they thought he was real? It doesn't prove that he was God. It proves that people believed he was. And that's great, but lots of people have believed lots of different people were gods. And you would say none of them were. Right? I mean, there's only one God. So they are all wrong, but they all believe they're worshiping a real God or multiple real gods, as real as the God you believe in. So the act of offering a sacrifice does not prove anything. It just proves that they believed something.
But also that the early Christian liturgy involved offering the one sacrifice of Jesus Christ. As I noted in previous episodes, the description of offering the Eucharist in remembrance of Jesus in the Gospels uses the Greek word anamnesis, which is more properly translated memorial sacrifice.
Here's a question. Why was Jesus telling you to do things in Greek? He was born in Palestine, which was not ruled by the Greeks. So why would he have been doing anything in... Like, I know that this is a fine point and maybe a meaningless one. Like, fine as in detailed, not, like, good. I don't know if this is a point that's worth making, but it seems to me to be an issue that these people spoke in Aramaic and maybe they knew Hebrew. Probably none of them were literate, but maybe some of them were. Like, we're willing to concede some of those points, but there's no reason to believe any of them spoke Greek, except Paul. And Paul grew up in Asia Minor. He probably knew Greek because he was educated, but the Romans spoke Latin, and the Romans were in charge of Palestine when Jesus was around. So if you knew a non-native language, you probably would know some Latin. So why are all of the texts in Greek? How do we know that the Greek is a faithful translation of the original texts, be they in Aramaic or Hebrew, which we have never seen a trace of, right? So, like, I take an issue with the reliance on various Greek words when, with the exception of maybe the letters of Paul and Luke, that would not have been the original language of the text or of the story. So it's already a translation, right? And sometimes you have to work to translate stuff. Sometimes it doesn't translate perfectly. You don't have the exact meaning, or you don't know it that well, so you're approximating. That happens now, right? There are words in German that are a single word that do not translate as a single word in other languages because they're like a concept. German has a way to express a concept in a single word, but we don't, so we have to use several words to explain it. It doesn't, that's not important. It doesn't mean one language is better or anything, but it does show you the difficulty in directly translating from one language to another. So who knows? Who knows what sorts of things had to be massaged, assuming the people who say they wrote the Gospels, right? The assuming the apostles, Matthew, Mark, and John, right? Luke was not an apostle, but assuming those guys actually did write their own stuff, why would they have been able to write it in Greek unless it was divine intervention, which makes everything possible, right? And then we're no further than where we started, because I don't believe that happened. I don't believe God made it happen, but he kind of had to. So anyway, getting into the semantics of the Greek seems to me to be flimsy. No matter how fancy it seems, it's flimsy to me.
So these early Christians didn't just believe Jesus was God. They believed that they received the God-man in the Eucharistic sacrifice. That's why St. Cyprian, writing around the time of this inscription, said the following: "For if Jesus Christ, our Lord and God, is himself the chief priest of God the Father, and has first offered himself a sacrifice to the Father, and has commanded this to be done in commemoration of himself, certainly that priest truly discharges the office of Christ, who imitates that which Christ did, and he then offers a true and full sacrifice in the church to God the Father, when he proceeds to offer it according to what he sees Christ himself."
I love that they fucked up the spacing, so they didn't have room to write the whole word, so they had to drop it down a couple lines to get those last couple letters in.
Himself to have offered. Before we check out the next two pieces of evidence, this is just a reminder that there's
Evidence is the word he is using.
another source outside the Bible that can build up your faith, that being this channel.
Boo. Plug. Boo.
So if you want to help us make content like this,
I
please
do
hit the
not.
subscribe button and support us for as little as $5 a month at TrendOnePodcast.com. All right, next up is number 2. Jesus' tomb is a garden tomb. John 19:41 says, "Now in the place where he was crucified there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb where no one had ever been laid."
Now, John dates to, if not the 70s, the 90s. So we're talking many years after this has happened, and I would have to look at the other Gospels to see if they agree with John in the description. And we'll look at Matthew. We'll look at Mark, because Mark is the first one. Pretty much everybody agrees Mark was the first gospel written. So let's see here. They mock him, they crucify him, the death, the burial. It was preparation day, so as evening approached, Joseph of Arimathea went to Pilate and asked for Jesus' body. Pilate was surprised to hear that he was already dead. This is partly because of, this makes sense. This is a realistic thing to say because crucifixion tended to drag on. He asked the centurion if Jesus had died, gave the body to Joseph. This doesn't really make any sense. That's not how they operated. But, moving on. Joseph brought some linen cloth, took down the body, wrapped it in linen, and placed it in a tomb cut out of rock. Then he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. So that's it. It's a tomb cut out of stone. John says, in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden. That doesn't really track, because Golgotha, where Jesus is supposed to have been crucified, was not a lovely place. It was like where the trash was. So this is not like a lovely garden area. Now, could there be a garden here? Sure. I can't disprove that there could be one in the 1st century, but this is not like a nice residential gated area. This is outside the city walls. It's a desolate place because it's outside the city. Anyway, Mark does not mention there being a garden. I'll look at Matthew also, and we'll just see what Matthew says. Mark 27. The Judas story, that's a interesting one that people don't want to talk about. Death of Jesus, burial of Jesus. Joseph of Arimathea went to Pilate, asked for Jesus' body, took the body and placed it in his own tomb that he'd cut out of the rock. He rolled a stone in front of the entrance and went away. So, again, we have two different places where it says it was a stone tomb. It was a rock tomb. In Matthew, he elaborates a little bit and says it was Joseph's tomb and it hadn't been used. And in Mark, it doesn't say that it was anybody's tomb. It just says they buried him in a tomb. In John, it says there was a garden with a new tomb.
In my previous episode on the two tombs of Jesus linked below, I talk about the so-called Garden Tomb of Jerusalem. It's popular with Protestants because it lacks the Catholic and Orthodox elements that you find in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But this Protestant tomb of Jesus also has no good historical claim to being Jesus' actual tomb.
Right, unlike the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which has been validated by carbon dating and DNA testing. I mean, I understand, again, as I say all the time, I'm trying to be very comprehensive. I understand that he believes that. He believes that there is good evidence that the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is really where Jesus was buried. But there is not. There's tradition, right? But tradition is not sufficient. It's not evidence. It's just tradition. It's evidence that people believe it. But people believe that the other one is true too. So who's to say?
In contrast, the traditional side of Jesus' tomb within the Church of the Holy Sepulchre does have good evidence for its historicity. Now, you wouldn't think of a picturesque garden tomb in this spot.
It had, look, I like the doves up there. Yeah, it had, like I said, they DNA tested it and it said, yep, Jesus was here. And spelled it wrong.
And it would be hard to know that since the Emperor Hadrian built temples to the pagan gods of Rome over the site of Calvary and Jesus' tomb, which ironically marked the site for future pilgrims to know its location. Recently, my friend Karen Bertuzzi did an episode on his channel discussing new archaeological evidence that Jesus' tomb in the Holy Sepulchre was built over a garden, just as it's described in John's Gospel.
But not as it's described in Mark or Matthew. Right? I mean, why? All you can say to this, what I'm saying, all you can say is, well, Mark and Matthew didn't mention it, but John did. And Mark and Matthew didn't leave it out because it wasn't in there. Like, John didn't add that detail. Mark and Matthew just didn't feel like they had to mention it. John writes a little bit differently, and so he brings it up. He brings up these details. Mark and Matthew could have also brought up those details. They just didn't include them. That's not the same as John just made it up himself, whoever John was. Right? Like, how? That's it. That's the only way you can get around it.
Geobotanical analyses, which is just a fancy word for studying ancient plant remains, revealed that there were olive pits, grape seeds, and pollen trapped in sealed soil layers beneath the church floor. And these weren't just like random seeds scattered about, they were actually neatly organized into terraced planting beds lined by low stone walls. Exactly what you'd expect to see in a cultivated garden from the 1st century.
Isn't archaeology cool? Like, there's nothing supernatural about this. But isn't it cool that we can figure out those kinds of details based on the way stuff decays, the way stuff is preserved, you know, finding things in different layers tells you. It's just amazing the kinds of details we can pull out about a period of time that we really can't do much else to learn about. You know, we're pretty limited in our sources. And a lot of the really mundane stuff doesn't get talked about very much, right? Why would you describe how you set up your planters in your diary, right? Most people couldn't write, so it's really cool that we're able to put together more and more detailed pictures of what life could have looked like for people as we go. He looks, listen, to me, this guy looks sinister. I'm not sure, maybe it's the acoustic guitar in the back that's lurking, like he's gonna try to sing a praise song at me. But something about him makes me not trust him.
As if that weren't enough. Researchers
No
also
offense, I'm
found
sure he's a nice guy. That's not one of those Catholics that keeps going to jail.
Caves formed by nature, they were purposefully hand-chiseled chambers dating precisely to the era around Jesus' crucifixion. Again, just as the Gospels describe.
Check out Cameron.
Okay, well, I'm just not for nothing. Could that have been a storage room? I mean, I don't know. I don't know that there was a lot of planting of gardens by tombs. Maybe that was really common. But I don't necessarily assume there's a garden and there's a cave. That means it's a tomb. I would probably think maybe there's produce in there. Maybe people are storing radishes or something. Maybe that's where they churn butter. Like, I don't know. I mean, it could be a bunch of stuff. But you generally didn't keep like food and dead bodies that close together. Like it wasn't clean. So yeah, I don't think that necessarily tracks.
Cameron's whole episode linked below for more on that. But I want to respond to a few points that Stephen Woodford, an atheist commenter from Rationality Rules, made in reply to Cameron, because Stephen really made a big deal out of nothing in his reply.
Okay.
Fallacy here is rather obvious. Cameron's essentially arguing that the gospel says someone was buried in a rock-cut tomb outside the city walls. We found rock-cut tombs outside of the city walls. Therefore, the gospel account is historically accurate. Again, by using this logic, archaeologists discovering Troy, as described in Homer's Iliad, would prove that Achilles was actually the son of a goddess. This should be obvious, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say that it is obvious to most Christians, surely. But finding this setting doesn't validate the supernatural claims.
Hey, I agree with him on this. I don't know if I agree with every single thing that guy says or believes, but I 100% agree with this point. You found a tomb in a place, and then there was also a book that said there was a tomb in a place. Okay, cool. I mean, it's cool that the Bible got that detail right. There's no reason for me to argue with it. But you can't really say that we found a tomb, therefore it's the tomb, right? That place has been occupied for a really long time. You have to believe that that's the tomb. But there's no reason to believe it is the tomb any more than a different one is the tomb. You can talk about how maybe, you can talk about the Roman emperor built something there. Okay, but again, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the tomb. And it also doesn't mean that he came back from the dead. Right? That's not covered here. Just even if you I don't contest that Jesus was buried. Hola. I have no, if he was executed by the state, well, they probably wouldn't have buried him because that's sort of a propaganda tool, crucifixion. It's really nasty. You leave people up on the cross for days because you want people to see what happens when you fuck with Rome. I'm sure some people enjoyed doing it. I don't think it was necessarily a super fun thing for the Romans to do, but it was effective, and it was to create, get in line, you fuckers. You want us to put you up there? Here's an example of what happens when you go against the state. I'm totally willing to believe that a rabble-rouser who was telling people that the kingdom of heaven was coming back and God was going to kick out the Romans, I totally believe they would kill him. That makes sense. They'd done it before. But that does not mean that he was divine any more than the other people who have been killed for claiming to be divine were. Because Christians only believe that was true one time. Only one guy. But it says Joseph of Arimathea rolled the stone in front of the tomb himself. So if one guy could close it, surely one or two guys could open it again. I mean, like, this atheist guy is 100% right on this point. I don't speak for any of his other points, but on this point, I am in agreement with him.
Made about what happened there.
No, but it provides more evidence for that supernatural conclusion.
No, it does not. It provides evidence to say the person who was writing this story got a detail right about the time that they lived in, or was very close to the time that they lived in. If I was writing a book, I could mention that there was a train track in a town, and also Superman was there. And you could go to that town and find a train track and be like, damn, Superman was here. Right? Just because you can find a piece of evidence that was accurately recollected in a text written by people living in that area at that time, that's not proof of anything other than they weren't lying that that's what a tomb looked like. Again, as a Christian, this stuff is useful. Like, I get it. This is, well, what it is, and this is the role of an apologist is, well, it's not technically impossible, right? This tomb, hey, we found a tomb that looks like a tomb that was mentioned in the Bible. So the Bible's right about that. So why isn't the Bible right about Jesus being real and raising people from the dead? Right? That's a big leap, but it's not when you're a Christian. It's like, oh, of course, there is historical evidence to support what I already know to be true. The Bible is true, and the stuff that I can find outside the Bible that backs it up is just proof that I'm right. It's incorrect reasoning, but it's not like stupid, right? Christians are not morons. Some of them are, but some non-Christians are. You know, Christians often do have a serious interest in, you know, backing up what they believe. They just don't really have an interest in disproving what they believe, right? So they are willing to accept science and archaeology up to a point, but let's not forget that people said that dinosaurs were fake, like to try to take people away from God, and we know pretty conclusively that that's not true. Any 7-year-old can tell you that that's not true.
There is no way to directly prove a miracle like the resurrection or
Correct.
the ascension through
Correct.
archaeology. But historical sciences do provide empirical facts that can lead to a supernatural conclusion. For example, critics like John Dominic Crossan claim Jesus wasn't buried in a tomb at all, and his body, like the body of other criminals, was thrown in a pit to be devoured by wild animals. And so he claims the gospel account is a legend about his burial in a tomb. But archaeological finds, like the skeleton of a man named Jehoiakim, show that crucified criminals were buried in tombs. Also, Cameron is not saying, here's a tomb, therefore Jesus is God, like in Woodford's Troy example. Cameron's
Hold on. I'm not accusing Trent of hiding the ball here, because I wasn't reading
were buried in
that fast. Okay. So, Johannan, yeah, okay. We got the name from the ossuary. In his initial anthropological observations, Niku Haas concluded that Jehohanan was crucified with his arms stretched out and his forearms nailed. However, 1985 reappraisal by Joseph Zias and Eleazar Sekules of the Hebrew University found multiple errors in these observations. Zias and Sekules proposed that a horizontal beam was affixed to vertical stakes, with Johannan's arms tied and death occurring from asphyxiation. So, okay, that doesn't seem to be contesting that he was crucified somehow. They seem to be pretty confident that he was crucified. They just disagree on, like, Were his arms out, or were his arms up? I guess, or were they nailed, or not nailed? I don't know. But they seem to be in agreement that this dude was put on a cross. So fair enough.
Tombs. Also, Cameron is not saying, here's a tomb, therefore Jesus is God, like in Woodford's Troy example. Cameron's saying it's striking that the traditional tomb of Christ in a 4th century church also happens to be around other tombs that were built centuries earlier, thus confirming this site was not part of a later legend, but fits perfectly with the claim that Jesus of Nazareth was killed and then buried among other new tombs.
I would still go back and say, if I write a book and I say that there's I grew up in Terre Haute, Indiana. There's like a fucking 1,000 railroad crossings in Terre Haute. So if I wrote a book and said that Superman lived in Terre Haute and Superman took the train to work, we didn't have those kinds of trains, just they were freight trains. But, Superman got stopped at a railroad crossing, so he flew around the train instead of waiting for it to pass. You could go to Terre Haute and you could find those train tracks, and it's like, damn, train tracks. Just where he said there would be train tracks. It totally tracks that these train tracks existed in the time period of this story. Therefore, Superman was here, right? Like, that's the leap that you have to be able to make. And the evidence does not support that leap. It supports all the way up to that leap. But it does not support the final conclusion that you have to get to of, therefore the supernatural exists.
And the same is true of there being a garden, which, contrary to Woodford's claim, weren't all over the place, but would be a unique thing to find in this location that further corroborates John's claims.
Again, it would be unique to find a garden that close to a tomb in the Jewish world. They were pretty serious about, cleanliness. Not that there couldn't be. Sure, it's certainly possible that they did do that. I don't know that they didn't. But it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense that you would grow stuff around dead bodies. That does seem like it would not track with the Levitical laws.
All of this confirms historical details that make the natural facts supporting the resurrection more reliable. Christ died by crucifixion.
Sure.
Was buried in a locatable tomb.
Possibly.
His followers claimed to see him physically alive 3 days later.
True.
They were capable of checking his tomb to see if it...
Well, they claimed to see him at some point. The claim they make is that they saw him 3 days later. Although they don't make that claim in Mark. Again, this stuff it's not hard, but it is definitely not what you think about when you are a Christian. Right? You just don't think about investigating. You don't go looking for these details because you already sort of understand that, the Gospels are all telling the same story. It's just like you've got different details that, some stories have and some don't. But that doesn't mean that any of them are wrong. It doesn't mean that anybody's lying. So in Matthew, the women go and tell the disciples. Jesus met them. This is all... These accounts are very different across the Gospels, and we don't really ever talk about it. But, okay, so this is Matthew 28. And this saying, he was risen, the angel appeared to the woman, then Jesus appeared to the women, and then Jesus went and talked to them in Galilee. Okay. Mark, y'all are all black kids, and Mark, but we rock with Mark. Mark 16 says, after the end of the Sabbath, the women went to the tomb. They asked each other who will roll the stone away, but the stone had already been rolled away. They saw a young man in the tomb. He said, "Don't be alarmed, you're looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is risen, he's not here. See the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter." My dad has a whole sermon about this "and Peter" phrase. It's a good sermon, to be honest. "He's going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. So he tells them to go tell the disciples, and the text says they didn't. Now, I can cover the sermon briefly, but these later verses 9 through 20 do not seem to be part of the original text. So, as far as the earliest manuscripts we have go, this verse 8 is the end of Mark. It seems that 9 through 20 may have been added later, as more resurrection stories started to go around. Again, Mark is the earliest gospel, and John wasn't written until maybe the 90s. So there's a lot of time for these stories to get fleshed out. Anyway, so that's how Mark ends. So, and Peter, right? So, Peter was one of the core disciples. He was one of the big three, right? You had Peter, Paul, and Mary. Bad joke. You had Peter, Paul, and John. They were the big three. And Peter was committed, right? He was committed to the point where when they came to arrest Jesus, Peter was ready to, right? My dad always says, Peter wasn't trying to cut that guy's ear off, right? Peter had his sword out and he was ready to go toe to toe with the Romans in order to try to protect Jesus, or just go down fighting. Because again, I mentioned this, but there had been messianic movements in Israel before. They hated the Romans, and there had been a lot of fighting with the Romans. There were zealots, right? Simon the Zealot was it's different than the Simon we call Peter. But Simon the Zealot was one of Jesus' apostles, and he was basically a right-wing terrorist, right? That's what zealots were. They were stabbing Romans and committing crimes because they wanted the Romans out of Israel. So, anyway, this is not a surprise that this movement could be violent, because some of the people who were already in it were already part of a violent movement. People think it's all peace and love, but that was Jesus's thing, right? Think about how Martin Luther King Jr. had his we've got to be non-violent in our demonstrations. And there are people underneath him who disagreed very strongly with that position. But the official line was nonviolent opposition, right? That's kind of what Jesus had going. He was saying, the kingdom of heaven, it's a mystical thing. The kingdom of heaven is like a this or that. But some of the people in his closest 12 were very serious about getting the fucking Romans out of Israel and restoring the kingdom. Because, again, not something we talk about that much, but, Israel was not ruling itself independently. There was no king. There was King Herod, but he died, and he was a puppet placed there by the Romans. They were not independent. They were they were part of Syro-Palestine, and they were occupied by Romans directly because of their continued rebellions and desires for being an independent country. So they were not independent at this time. Pilate was in charge. The Romans were in charge. They fucking hated that, and fair enough. I also do not want to be a colony, right? But violent opposition to the Romans was not uncommon over the period of time that they were there. So anyway, Peter was ready to go down. He was ready to die. I don't know what his thought process was. Again, this story may or may not have happened, but it certainly could have happened. I don't know what Peter was thinking. Did he think, even if I die, he'll bring me back to life? Did he think, if I die, I'll get to be with the Father? Whatever he thought that looked like. Who knows? Did he think, I won't die because I'll start fighting and Jesus will zap these guys with fire from heaven? Right? Who knows? But he was ready to do murders in the name of the Lord. And according to the story, Jesus stopped him, right? You also have Jesus telling Peter that he will deny him. And Peter said, he probably used some swear words. But Peter said, that's crazy. There's no way I'll ever deny you. I will die for you. And then they're in the garden, and he backs those words up, right? Again, we're tracking the story. And in the garden, Peter is ready to die. And Jesus says, I don't want you to do that. And Peter's conception of things kind of is destroyed, right? He is like, I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought I knew what this was about. I thought I knew what we were doing here. And now I don't know at all. And the guy that I thought was the Messiah, God's anointed. Also, Messiah is a political term. Messiah doesn't mean divine. It just means like God's chosen. And there are some reasons to believe that Jesus didn't necessarily consider himself to be divine. I don't want to get into those. But there's some like very technical phrasing that seems to date to earlier Jewish conceptions of a man who was granted like divine power or authority by God. So he wasn't divine, he wasn't part God. God chose him and then gave him power. And you can see that in Mark, but that's not really the point. The point is that Peter thought, he knew, man, this is the guy, and whether he gets rid of the Romans or whether it doesn't matter because God comes back or who knows, this is the guy. He's going to save Israel. And now he's arrested and they're taking him away. And he didn't even fight back. What am I supposed to do? Are they going to kill all of us now? And like, I'm willing to go down fighting, but I don't understand what's going on here, right? So that is, kind of the guess, narratively, that's the guess of where Peter is at the moment. And then he's sitting in this courtyard around a fire, and people come up to him and say, hey, don't I recognize you from somewhere? And he's like, nah, I have one of those faces. And someone else comes up and says, no, I'm pretty sure I recognize you. You were with that dude, right? And he's like, no, man, I'm telling you. Listen, I get this all the time. That's another guy. It wasn't me. And a third person comes up and says, no, listen, I saw you. I know it's you, right? I never forget a face. And Peter, with cursing, says, fuck off. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know that guy. Get fucked. Or the equivalent in first century Aramaic, right? And then, as the story goes, Peter hears the rooster. And he realizes, he was right. He said I was going to deny him, and I did. There are also different versions of the rooster crowing, but this is a minor detail. But he's like, So the way you can read this narratively is Peter is like destroyed, right? Emotionally, psychically. The guy he thought was going to save them from the Romans just got killed by the Romans. And he might be a target, And not only did the guy he think was going to be the savior of Israel, not only is he dead, but before he died, I sold him out. Just like he told me I would. So this inclusion of "and Peter" is specifically tell Peter. Tell everybody else, but specifically tell Peter. Because I don't want him to feel like he has been cast out, or that I don't still love him, or whatever, right? That's the idea. The idea is the reason that Peter is specifically mentioned is because Jesus or the angel or whoever is taking special care to let him know he's still in the club. He's still important to the Lord. It's a good story, right? It's very compelling, and it works with the narrative. But again, the problem is supernatural is the problem with that story. But yeah, my dad's a good preacher. I mean, I don't agree with everything he believes, but I have learned a lot of my ability to speak and like tell stories and connect. I've learned a lot of that from watching him. So, you know, it's a useful skill.
Was truly empty. Number 3, a new defense of Josephus' testimony about Jesus. Some people ask me if there's evidence for Jesus outside the Bible, and there is. But even if there weren't, the Bible is not an invalid source.
Why? I mean, there probably is. There seems to be evidence that Jesus was a historical person. We don't have his birth certificate, but, you know, but there seems to be reasons to believe that he was a historical figure. But why can I trust just the Bible?
It's like many other ancient documents, and so it can be used to demonstrate truths about the ancient world. That's
A lot of ancient documents are like curse texts or blessings that you would invoke, and then you would have the blessing of whatever god that particular prayer was to. You might call it magic. You know, I mean, some people might say that's reductive, but you could call it magic. Those are ancient texts. Should I believe that if I recite them that I will do a magic spell? Because, like, I mean, you can take that position. I would think it's silly. But you could certainly take the position that the supernatural is real, therefore witchcraft is real. And people can do spells. And I guess I would respect that because it's consistent with the idea that magic is real and God can do magic. But I don't think Trent would take that position. Like, I don't think too many people would argue that, oh yeah, all the magic spells everywhere else are fake, but the Bible is real, is what you would say. You know, just a meaningless side point.
said there are some early non-Christian witnesses to Jesus. One of them is Flavius Josephus, a Jewish historian employed by the Romans who wrote a history of the Jewish war against Rome and a history of the Jewish people called the Antiquities. In Book 20 of the Antiquities, Josephus refers to the brother of Jesus who was called Christ, whose name was James, which nearly all scholars believe is a...
Well, they're not necessarily meaningless, but they're often not the killer blow, right? They're often technical or like minor observations that I think are notable, but they're not necessarily what I would rely on when I am trying to defeat an argument. It's just like, well, look, what about this? Right? It took me 1 second. I'm fucking high, and it took me 1 second to think of a counterexample to the point you're making. So, how do you explain that counterexample? But, you know, it's I do. And it's because I really want to be clear. I really want to make sure that I am not giving the impression that I'm not considering more than one angle or more than one position. Right? I because that's how you use gotchas. And so I'm trying to preface, I thought about this, but I don't think it makes sense. Right? Also, when you read footnotes, those are sometimes the funniest shit, because that's when, like, if you can appreciate scholarly language, you can really see people getting their asses burned in the footnotes. Like one of the most brutal burns is just like contra so-and-so's name, because that's a direct insult. That's a direct calling out of this person's work is bullshit, but I'm not allowed to say that. So I'll just say, contrary to what this person says, they are wrong. And it can be really entertaining. Some authors are better at writing them in an engaging way, and then I enjoy academic writing sometimes.
It's authentic. What's more controversial is Book 18 of the Antiquities, where Josephus says this.
Did you get bullied into footnotes? I mean, I'm assuming that's what that means.
About this time there lived Jesus, a wise man, if indeed one ought to call him a man. For he was one who performed surprising deeds, and was a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. He was the Christ. And
Right, and you have to say it in like a diplomatic, high language sort of way, but you know what it means when you read. It's like, oh, this dude is pissed. This dude thinks this other guy is trash. Oh, okay, I gotcha. Also, like, look. This is what Josephus is saying they were saying. When Pilate had condemned him to a cross, those who first come to love him did not cease. He appeared to them, spending a third day restored to life, and 1,000 other marvels about him. And the tribe of Christians have still to this day not disappeared.
when, upon the accusation of the principal men among us, Pilate had condemned him to a cross, those who had first come to love him did not cease. He appeared to them, spending a third day restored to life. For the prophets of God had foretold these things, and 1,000 other marvels about him. And the tribe of the Christians so called after him has still to this day not disappeared. Most scholars believe Josephus did refer to Jesus, but that this passage has been subject to Christian revisions over time.
Oh, no way.
Josephus was an unconverted Jew, so he would never have said Jesus was the Messiah or the Christ. Origen even says in his commentary on Matthew that Josephus did not accept Jesus as Christ. The reference of Jesus rising on the third day would also be out of place for an unconverted Jew. But scholars don't think the entire passage is a forgery, because there are other phrases that make it unlikely a Christian invented them.
Sure. I mean, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. I could get the Declaration of Independence and insert a paragraph about lolly porn, and you could be like, well, we don't have proof that the document's a forgery because that text, like the bulk of it, seems correct. So we can't say for sure that this paragraph was added later. I mean, obviously that's a little bit of a stretch, but it's the same idea. If you're saying, well, part of this might have been edited by Christians later, all right, that kind of defeats the whole validity, because they believe that Jesus was the Christ, so they would make it say that, even if Josephus didn't believe that.
The whole thing. Which is,
Am I getting too into the weeds on this stuff? This seems obvious to me. I don't know if it's obvious. I don't know if I'm like hammering away at something pointless, but it just is not difficult to come up with counters to this stuff to me. I don't know.
itself would also be unheard of because Christians did not alter Josephus anywhere else, nor did they alter the first century texts of the Jew Philo, who discussed ideas relevant to Christianity but never mentions Jesus. For
Okay.
example, the passage in Josephus calls Jesus a wise man, which is not a Christian description of Jesus because it makes it sound like Jesus was merely a man. Likewise, Josephus says that Christians belong to a tribe, but Christians did not describe themselves in this way. For a while, I held to the partial authenticity theory, but now I'm much more open to the idea that the entire passage is authentic.
Of course, because it agrees with what you need it to say. Well, the thing about it is rooted in logic with one very big assumption. Everything else hinges on that assumption. That basically, again, not to be reductive, but that magic is real. If magic is real, the way they believe it is, everything else they believe makes sense. Because you can explain it with magic. Why doesn't this make sense? God is all powerful and time is relative, so it doesn't have to make sense. He said he would put things in the world to confuse the smart people. So that's why it doesn't make sense, because it's proof. It's proof when it doesn't make sense that God is tricking you. And he said he would. And that's all very convenient, but you have to accept the assumption that magic is real. And if you don't, then it doesn't make sense. But like, I want to be fair. It totally tracks. If the God of the Bible is real, then everything else you can explain away. You can explain it away with magic or with God trying to trick you. And I don't I don't accept those, but it logically follows that God can do whatever he wants. I believe that. If God is real, he can do whatever he wants. And so logic and the rules of physics, they don't apply. But if you don't accept that assumption, then it's very easy to pick apart, because you have to keep coming back to, well, God. And I say, God's not real, and we are back at the beginning. Right? That's really how it all ends up.
And have come across new answers to other common objections to this claim. This past May, T.C. Schmidt, who earned a PhD at Yale,
Oh man, I love that guy.
with Oxford University Press called Josephus and Jesus, New Evidence for the One Called Christ. Schmidt has done extensive word analysis of the passage
Jesus is looking pretty pale in that picture. I can't help noticing.
to show that the vocabulary adheres to Josephus' style. It's not something the typical forger would produce. Schmidt's also shown the passage fits.
What about a really good forger? I mean, you said typical forger. Okay. What about a really smart one? Like,
in the context of the surrounding narrative in Josephus, and has answered many
again,
similar-
my argument is not proof that it was altered any more than his argument is proof that it wasn't altered. It's just, we can make these arguments against each other, and you can never reach a conclusion. This wouldn't make sense because a regular scammer wouldn't be able to do it. And I would say, well, there have been some really sophisticated scammers, and they could have probably done it. And then, again, we're back where we started, where I have to accept that this is supernatural, and I don't. So we have very little progress that we can make.
or objections, claiming the passage is not authentic. He also does a good job showing how Josephus' original testimony about Jesus was probably neutral or even negative, which explains why Christians didn't cite this passage until later in church history. Other manuscripts show that the phrase, "he was the Christ," was probably rendered, "he was called Christ," which matches what Josephus says in Book 20. Also,
Okay.
a Christian had interpolated the phrase,
I mean, that seems significant to me, because they called him Little John is different than saying he was 6'10", or he was 4'8", right? Either way you want to go with it. He was the Little John is different than he was called Little John.
they probably would have said Jesus is the Christ in the present tense. Likewise, the phrase, "if he be called a man," was probably not from a Christian revision, but from Josephus thinking Jesus may have been a wonder worker or a sorcerer, which falls in line with ancient Jewish polemics against Jesus. And the
Sure.
line about Jesus appearing to the disciples on the third day.
There were a lot of sorcerers. There was a guy that Paul mentioned called Simon the Sorcerer. Like, they were around. People believed in magic. People believed in the supernatural and also just literal magic. So, okay. Josephus said that the Jews, or the Jews who became Christians, thought Jesus was a magic worker. Well, there have been a lot of them. So, that's not a unique claim.
Day probably went more like this given the grammar of the passage and the textual evidence. He appeared to them to be alive on the third day, given that the divine prophets had spoken such things and many other marvels about him. In other words, Josephus was describing what the disciples believed, or what it appeared to the disciples, without necessarily endorsing their beliefs.
Okay.
Finally, mythicists who say Jesus never existed
That's not the argument I make.
often claim that even if some version of this passage were authentic, this doesn't prove anything because Josephus probably got his information from second-generation Christians who may have already believed in a mythic spiritual Jesus or got it from the Gospels themselves. But Schmidt shows that when Josephus uses sources like the Jewish letters from Aristeas, he often copies phrases word for word, which he doesn't do with any of the Gospels. And the nature of Josephus' description makes more sense coming from a Jewish source, possibly a member of the Sanhedrin itself. And here's the best part. Schmidt's book, at least of this recording, so you may have to act fast, is available as an open source work, so you can download it for free. I
Oh,
love
good.
when academics do this because there's a lot of great scholarship out there, but it's often inaccessible to lay people who don't want to pay $120 for an academic
That's true.
monograph. So if you want to get the book, check out the link in the description below. So those are 3 new pieces of evidence for Jesus from outside of the Bible. If there are other ancient testimonies and sources about Jesus you'd like me to talk about, please leave your recommendations in the comments below.
I said this before you started watching, but I am more than happy to concede that Jesus was a historical person. That I have no qualms about. Some people don't think that's true, but I really don't care. It is very likely that he was a real historical person. The problem is, was he God? It doesn't matter if he was historical. Alexander the Great was historical, and he also claimed to be descended from a god. So, was he God? Well, it depends who you ask. I'm going to also play a song that you missed because I've been listening to it on repeat, and I really love the synth in this one. I'm tired of Trent. Do you want to watch a video that I took on top of the mountain? I can mute that video and play it while this is playing. I actually uploaded a video. I don't know. I don't know if you ever are just like tooling around on my page, seeing what's new. But this is all wind. I didn't want to upload it as a short also. So I'm not sure why that happened. It's 2 minutes, so I think it auto made it a short, but it's not supposed to be in portrait mode. No, it's not. Yeah, it's supposed to be in landscape mode. But we'll mute that because it's just wind. Yeah, I'll start doing like visualizers. That's the mountain. That's the mountain that I was on. That was the summit. That third, like, hill back there. That's why I pointed. That's Mount Bierstadt. That's a 14er. You can see my old footprints from that morning. I was the only person on that trail for the whole time I was out there. Those are my steps breaking through the snow. That's Square Top Mountain, and it is really striking when it's covered in snow. Boy, that timed out like almost perfectly, actually. That's unintentional, but I am gonna play another song because I've been. This is not how I get there. We are going to Rocky Mountain National Park next week, or I guess Memorial Day, so a week from Monday. I'm very excited. I'm thinking I really am. I've been watching a lot of hiking videos that people do, and I'm thinking I might make some. It is not the sort of thing that is like lucrative. Does not seem to be popping off for anybody. But there are a lot of trails that I want to do that aren't necessarily quality videos of, so you don't necessarily know what they look like at different times of the year. And it might be nice to have that just out there. Like the hike I did, the Geneva Mountain hike, is really not done very often. It's just, for whatever reason, it's a really beautiful hike, and it's cool because you're up over 12,000 feet, so it's alpine, you're above the tree line. It's really cool, but there's a 14er right next door, and pretty much everybody goes and does the 14er. So there's a million videos of people doing Mount Bierstadt, but there's like a half dozen videos of people doing Mount Geneva. And I think it would be fun to highlight some of the trails that are just like there's almost everything. If it's beautiful, it doesn't matter where you go. You're probably going to see beautiful views all over the place, but some are more popular than others. And I think it'd be fun to document some of those lesser done trails. We will see. I really need a GoPro probably if I'm going to do that, and I do not have one, so that's a eventually plan. But I can still do stuff with my iPhone or with my camera. All right, this one's fun. This is gym music for me, right? This is play before a basketball game during warm-ups to get your energy up. This is so fun. It would go so crazy live. The way you can build up for that drop. Duke Deuce is from Memphis. He's like a crunk rapper. We'll do one more from this album. Alright, check out check that one out. Thanks for hanging out. That's so good. Well. I like Nightmare. I like Crank That, I guess. But I think, you know what? I'm gonna listen to it, and then I'm gonna be done because I love this song. Just love this one.
Y'all gotta pump my taste, bitch. Hold up. Y'all can't talk about basic. Hold up. We mighty more Power Ranger. Hold up. My niggas also dangerous. Hold up. Y'all niggas talk outrageous. Hold up. Don't get caught in the matrix. Hold up. Got that touch my savior. Hold up. Give me that touch with my hand. Punk ass lyrics can't hear it no more. Stand up to the man, can't fear him no more. So the dream don't feel it no more. You been dumping a minute but can't steer it no more. Riding a wave and now you're chilling on shore. What's it used to being rich when your inside's poor? But you don't wanna see more. You wanna see more, but you wanna see soul. Life that slows you down, your body is acting up, your mind is out of bounds. It's telling you pack it up. You shadow my thoughts and memories that's adding up. Like threesomes overseas, bitches without a buzz. You feel alive like you can't have enough. You probably feel paralyzed if you ain't had a buzz. You still feel paralyzed, the bugs and trackless. Friends just having kids and shit ain't adding up. What's the use of having a world with no love? What's the use of having a light with no love? What's the use of ingredients with no sauce? What's the use of the physical with no source? Y'all gotta pump my taste, bitch. Y'all can't talk about basic. We mighty more Power Rangers. My niggas also dangerous. Y'all niggas talk outrageous. Don't get caught in the matrix. Got that touch my savior. Give me that touch of my haters.
That's a good one. All right. That's it for the week.